Okay, let's start with case 1. Facility X has pair housing listed as a default housing strategy for non-human primates in their written environmental enrichment plan. An investigator is requesting IACUC approval for single housing in order to be able to monitor stool quality because primates often get diarrhea. Table 1. Is this a citable violation according to USDA?
You said no.
No? Okay. Why is that?
All right, so our response was that it was no, and it is a investigator who is currently requesting IACUC approval. Therefore, he hasn't violated anything. He's trying to get pre-approval before he does anything.
Okay. Is it reportable to OLAW?
We said no as well because he's not non-compliant. He is still requesting ahead of time.
Okay.
The other, we'll just leave it for now.
And an AAALAC?
And again, no, because he's requesting
No
ahead of time.
mandatories, no suggestion for...
No.
Okay.
That all being said, we had a side conversation. If we were the IACUC or somebody looking in at this, we had a multitude of questions. So while the answer is no across the board for all those, there's a lot of back information that would be needed.
What sort of questions would the IACUC ask?
We can start. Primates often get diarrhea is a very vague statement that would need some clarification. We would want to know what his scientific justification for single housing is. There are a multitude of options in the term single housing. Is it strictly no contact? Are they going to have contact? Or are they going to be able to get out and socialize? So there's a lot of different questions that would need to be addressed.
Any table has anything else to add? No? Okay. USDA.
Okay, so yeah, those are some really good points that I don't know if I'm too close to the microphone. Good? Okay. Those are some really good points that your table brought up and discussed. The investigator is seeking IACUC approval with a concern on pair housing for the animals and having some diarrhea. Now, will the IACUC approve based on that justification? The IACUC can approve an exemption to social housing for non-human primates for scientific purposes. And probably the IACUC would want to discuss with the investigator what scientifically is causing the diarrhea. Is this an expectation from your study? How does this fit with your study so that it would be scientifically justified, or it may not fit into that type of exemption? Want me to? Oh, sure. So what we have is 3.8E2, 3.81E2, the committee may exempt an individual primate from participation in some or all of the otherwise required environment enhancement plan for scientific reasons set forth in the research proposal. That's where you'd find it in the regulations.
Okay, so from an OLAW perspective, you're correct, it's not reportable. And if found during an OLAW web site visit, what we would recommend or we would ask the committee to do is to enhance their oversight in reviewing the justification for single housing of these non-human primates. Exactly what your discussion had, that's what we would have asked during a site visit if prompted. The guide states that single housing of social species should be the exception and justified based on experimental requirements or veterinary-related concerns about animal well-being.
And as you know, AAALAC uses the guide, which Neera just mentioned. So here's some potential considerations the site visitors might bring up. The veterinarian could discuss the situation with the PI and advise that perhaps separating might actually stress the animals and could result in diarrhea by just doing that. And if there was a medical situation present that was causing the diarrhea, like Giardia or some bacterial infection, then that should be looked into specifically and not just separating because they might have diarrhea. And that was it. Thanks.
You're doing case 2?
Yeah, I'm doing case 2. All right, I'm up again. So case 2, during the semi-annual facility inspection of the rodent facility, the IACUC site visitors find several cages of rodents housed singly. Following review of the animal study protocol, the committee determines that single housing was without IACUC approval. Table 2, I believe, is right here. Could we have you tell us what your thoughts were on this? Thanks.
Sure. So we had actually more questions about this scenario. One being the species of rodent. Were they, ratus or mus, or were they another type of rodent like guinea pig or hamster? What was the number of cages found or the percentage of the colony? Were they singly housed due to medical treatment or some other potential exemption that the IACUC was not aware about? Or was it due to attrition, so uneven weaning? So those are some of the questions that we discussed prior to coming up with some of the resultant answers that we would want to know. So we did not think that it was subject to citation by the USDA. We did not think it was reportable to OLAW as a non-compliance, although it should get remediated. Right, I just want to make sure. Yeah. It should get remediated, especially if it's not due to medical management of the animal. And we posited that it's probably going to be an SFI rather than a mandatory finding, granted that the language in the guide says social housing should be the default rather than a must.
Right, okay. So, Tanya, you can start with the USDA.
So you're right on that. Again, there are a lot of questions still to be answered with this scenario. We don't know the reasons why the animals were separated. We don't know the species of rodent. If it's a USDA-covered rodent, then we would look into were there veterinary issues. As it says here on the slide, were there veterinary issues? Was the veterinary care staff involved with this decision? Were there incompatibility issues? And then you can get into, also for reasons of study activity. Now, if the IACUC has a policy on this, or if this is in the approved study of animal activity, that the expectation is these animals will be socially housed, and the animals were not socially housed despite the IACUC's expectations, then that could be a non-compliant item found on a USDA report because being that it's a change in approved activity. So it is another possibility depending on the specific circumstances. Thanks. Okay.
Yeah.
So from an OLAW perspective, because we would consider it reportable since it was done without prior IACUC approval. Okay. So, however, if it's what we call a classic case of protocol non-compliance. Now, if you, as you say, unless that protocol there was some statement that per policy, institutional policy, animals will be single house based on medical. Medical doesn't really require it, but if there were attrition or anything like that, then yes. But in this case, it specifically said it was done without IACUC approval. Yes, Jen. Right. So.
But if there was an IACUC reviewed and approved SOP that explained social housing exceptions that applied to this study protocol,
Right. It might not, yes. So it depends, again, it's not as straightforward. If you're, based on your discussion, it's valid questions. And so it can be reportable if there was no policy, there was nothing else in place, and they basically went off protocol. That would be non-compliance, that would be reportable, okay? The corrective actions would be pretty simple. Submit an amendment to request a single housing of these animals based on certain situations, depending on the situation. And if for a medical condition, confirm ongoing veterinary oversight. There must be veterinary oversight of these animals if that animal is single housed for a long-term reason. And if it can be socially housed after that condition resolves, then by all means it should be socially housed.
And so you can read here, in this case, I know you said it would probably be a suggestion. You know, there's a lot of factors that would be involved, so you touched on a lot of those. And just as a reminder, you know, the final determination of the finding is made by council, and commonly at council meetings there's discussions on these. So you said something about the number of cages, that could be part of it. Certainly, if there was a programmatic deficiency, that would likely have been a mandatory finding. If it was the program was solid, but there was a couple of exceptions to following that, like you said, if an animal had been taken out to use unsteady and the site visitors found one that was still there, that may end up as a suggestion. So looking at it from a programmatic versus a case-by-case basis would help determine the level of severity that council would bring into this, and then also the effect on the animals. And then the final note here is just that, if this was seen in the minutes by the site visitors from the program description, then they would want to assess to make sure that there had been follow-up action that was already discussed by the previous speakers here.
Thank you. So table 3 has this case study on the 2 female macaques that have been successfully paired for 2 years when they have a fight and are immediately separated. One female sustains multiple superficial abrasions to the head and mild bruising. The other has no lesions. The facility manager contacts a veterinarian who decides to put the pair back together. Care staff are directed to monitor the pair for compatibility twice daily for 15 minutes. Observations are documented and reported to the veterinarian. No other altercations are noted. The injured female is found dead with severe trauma 3 days later. What were your thoughts on those questions on USDA?
So the USDA would not expect this to be reported to them unless it was an example of an uncorrected previous problem like that had been discussed at a semi-annual program review. So we don't think the USDA would expect this to be reported directly to them. OLAW, on the other hand, has a list of reportable incidents, and they use it as an example failure to monitor animals post-procedurally as necessary to ensure animal well-being. So in this case, it was kind of a question because the veterinarian said, just put the animals back together. Usually, in a case like this, we would expect that the animals would be given maybe protective interactions so that they couldn't really get at each other right away until the animals had been assessed appropriately before they had full contact restored. So there was a question about the adequacy of the veterinary instruction. OLAW, if we called OLAW and said, hey, this happened, they would say, yes, do an investigation and report and send us a copy of your investigation, probably, so that they would understand all the details. And for AAALAC, AAALAC also gives examples of reportable incidents, and unexpected animal deaths is one of them.
Okay. From the USDA perspective, So based on that the way 3.81A3 is written, and I'll read it here, compatibility of non-human primates must be determined in accordance with generally accepted professional standards and actual observations as directed by the attending veterinarian to ensure that the non-human primates are in fact compatible. So this would not be a USDA citation because the actions had been directed by the veterinarian under the veterinarian's judgment. So this may be something that USDA may ask them on preventative measures for the future, something like that, but certainly not a citable issue with USDA. Thank you. And now OLAW.
So for OLAW, it would not be reportable if it's a single incident. If they did investigate and found that there was adequate veterinary care, the veterinarian acting as a subject matter expert knew these peers, and that was their, their expert opinion or their expert advice was to put these animals back together again. If investigation did show that these animals, that there was some negligence on the veterinarian's part, then it would be reportable. Also, it would be reportable if it was a repeated occurrence, for sure. Okay? If something we always say is, if in doubt, just give us a call. It's always a case-by-case basis. Sometimes it's not as black and white as it seems, and you get more information through the telephone call and conversations with the people that, there's something that happened, husbandry care or something went wrong, and that's what happened. So it's always best in your best interest to give us a call. It's not always not reportable. It depends on the cases and what happens at that particular time. Corrective action should identify the causes for that incompatibility and maybe consideration to modify or change the group dynamic at any point in time.
So I really liked your point about, looking back and saying not to challenge necessarily the credibility of the veterinarian, but to look at was there adequate review of this to make sure it wasn't just a quick decision to say, should protected contact have been part of this and things like that. So whether that was done in advance or later as an investigation. And you're right, John, that we do have guidance on what should be reported, and unexpected deaths is one of those. If you look in our rules of accreditation or in our FAQ, it gives you more information. And as Neera said, if it's not clear, you can always call us. You can email us. Our information is confidential, so if you send us an email of a report, we will put that in your file as well. And then just finally to close out here, citing our FAQ on social housing, that monkeys are known to be social species, so we would expect them to be socially housed. However, aggression needs to be certainly taken seriously, and there's lots of factors that we don't know about from this case because we had limited words on the slides, but there could have been a change in the environment that caused this aggression. So all those things, to be looked into to hopefully prevent this from happening again. And the final line is, you never want to have animals injured, but if it does happen, to try to look into it so it minimize it happening again.
So case 4. As part of a new research direction for a macaque mother-infant bonding and development study, the investigator submits an amendment requesting approval for 6 weekly sedations of the macaque mothers with required 8-hour periods of separation from the nursing infants. Case table 4. Yes.
So this seemed very similar to case 1 in the fact that this is an amendment being submitted and nothing has actually happened at this point. So it's not a citation to the USDA, it's not reportable to OLAW, and there's no corrective action for AAALAC because right now it's in a paperwork phase being reviewed.
Okay, so USDA first.
Okay, so true. Thank you. Okay, so yes, that's true, and certainly not cited. Something that's not been done is not citable, and this with the PI and the IACUC possibly working together could be a study activity that could work out. There are considerations that the USDA would look into with this kind of study if it were taking place. Under Part 3.81C1, infants and young juveniles are considered to be special considerations for non-human primates. And under 2.131B1, the handling section of the regulations talks about depending on how the separations are conducted and how the infants are cared for while separating from their moms. So essentially, that the activity considers the stress of separating the infant and mother and also the healthcare needs of the infant while the mother is not available to it. Thanks.
So OLAW would agree it's not a reportable because if as long as it's IACUC approved, it's scientifically justified and IACUC approved. But how we would recommend and we would hope that there would be refinements have been considered. Refinements like the timings of the sedations, are 6 sedations really necessary, or it can be reduced or spread out over longer periods of time? Can you use surrogates? And can they have some sort of visual or tactile access between those during that period, that 8-hour period of separation? Is there any kind of, way you can refine those methods so it's not as distressing to both the mother and the infant?
So the wording up here basically reminds us that this should be a collaborative effort, that the IACUC with the AV and the PI should look to basically do what Neera was just talking about, to make sure that the various angles of this have been considered from a study outcome perspective as well as from a welfare perspective, and see if everything has been done to achieve successful research while considering the impacts on the animals. And I guess I'm up again for case 5. Okay, case 5. The veterinarian has placed several overweight dogs on an exercise program involving daily treadmill walking using positive reinforcement. The dogs are pair housed in large runs, and the runs are more than twice the size required for the individual dogs. So table 5, if you could give us your feedback on this, thanks. No pun intended.
So similar to some other groups, we chose to interpret this situation. We decided that obesity was not subject to citation by the USDA and was not reportable to OLAW. We don't know what was causing the obesity, so hopefully as the attending veterinarian, we would investigate that. If it was our staff feeding illicit foods to our dogs, we would re-educate our staff and implement a SOP for feeding, so they would stop feeding human foods. Perhaps like someone interpreted like 2 cups of dog food as like overflowing kibble, 2 cups. So we would train our staff how to feed the dogs properly. We would have run blood work and try to determine if there are any health problems that were causing these dogs to become obese, like perhaps they were on a diabetes study. And we would also make a veterinary care plan that included a SOP for exercise, an SOP for the positive reinforcement, and also a reassessment plan. We want to reassess these dogs on a regular basis to make sure that they are losing the weight, or that if we needed to change their level of exercise at all.
Great. Go ahead, Tanya.
So that was some deep introspection on that case study, and to take it into face value, USDA would not necessarily cite the presence of a treadmill and a treadmill used as an exercise option that was prescribed by the veterinarian. There is a regulation on that in the requirement for exercise for dogs under 3.8C4, which talks about treadmills and in the vein of forced exercise. And this being not part of the exercise plan, but a part of a prescription of weight loss for the animals, we wouldn't look at it as forced exercise and would not cite that.
OLAW concurs. It's not reportable. It's a medical directive, and it's in the best interest of the animals as long as the animal is well adapted and trained for that sort of exercise regime. The guide states that caloric management, which may affect physiologic adaptations and alter metabolic responses in a species-specific manner, can be achieved by reducing food intake or by stimulating exercise, as Table 5 so appropriately put it. Thank you.
Yeah, I thought you guys did a really good job looking holistically, which is, hopefully what would happen when the site visitors were there. Was there a personnel aspect to this? Was there a study aspect? So as the slide says, the site visitors will look at it holistically to make sure all the angles are being taken care of, whether there was SOPs that needed to be developed. We hope the site visitors would not be that prescriptive to say you have to develop SOPs, but that's often a logical way of managing, the best intent of people to take the best care of the dogs. Too much of a good thing is not a good thing, right? So managing how all that happens in the facility.
Okay, case study 6. A new investigator brings Dutch belted rabbits with custom-made cages. She monitors growth, activity, serum chemistry, and performance on learning and memory tests. The cages allow the tests to be conducted in the home cage. The animals are socially housed, but the cage height is only 14 inches. She has 5 years of published data showing consistent growth and behavior for the colony. The rabbits can make all natural postures and postural adjustments. Table 6, what were your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so for USDA, 14 inches is the requirement. So for that, it wouldn't be a citable offense. And then for OLAW, that part was we kind of interpreted it to be, first of all, the guide says 16 inches is recommended. And if the institution has a policy for this is a standard housing for the animals and it's IACUC-approved, or if the protocol has scientific justification for the need for the cages to be 14 inches, and it's an approved departure from the guide, then it wouldn't need to be reportable to OLAW as noncompliance. However, if there is no institutional policy or the protocol doesn't have any justification for 14 inches, then it would be reportable. So that's what we came up with. For AAALAC, we don't think it would be, we don't think it would be a mandatory correction, maybe a suggestion for improvement if they didn't see fit that 14 inches was okay and our FAR policy didn't meet with what they wanted. So I guess it could go either way, right? Yeah.
Okay, well, from the USDA point of view, that was really good. You're dealing with standards with this one, but we do allow for innovative housing as well with rabbits. So you're right. Our minimum cage height is 14 inches for rabbits, and then depending on the weight of the rabbit, the size of the floor space changes. So a Dutch belt may be like 3 square feet. Required for each individual animal of floor space. In this case, doesn't talk about floor, doesn't tell you the size of the floor space. But from that, we also have another allowance for innovative housing in rabbits that has been approved by the IACUC for research facilities. If it's not a research facility, then it goes to approval by the APHIS administrator. but that's you could find that at 3.53C in the Animal Welfare Act. And one thing that we consider, it says in the regulations in the innovative housing, is that the animal must be able to make all natural postural adjustments, which it says in the case that they can. Thank you.
Good job, Table 6. I was involved in that discussion, and you were right on track. It's not reportable. The guide allows for the implementation of performance standards, so that you can depart from the guide. As long as you have well-established performance standards and it's IACUC reviewed and approved, then it's fine to go ahead and use those performance standards. That's one of the good things about the guide. It allows flexibility as long as there's no animal welfare concerns as a result of those performance standards you've established that departs from the guide. The guide states that the space recommendation presented here are based on professional judgment and experience. They should be considered the minimum for housing animals housed under conditions commonly found in laboratory animal housing facilities. So the 16 inches is what the recommended space height, the height in the guide. If you depart from that based on those performance standards and you have that documented, then you're fine.
And this is a summary agreeing with all of those comments about performance standards, and that the expectation is that the IACUC would periodically review that data, whether it's for exceptions to the height of the cages or exceptions to cage sanitation or whatever. And the site visitors may make their own personal assessment while they're there to make sure it was actually looked into specifically and not just a rubber stamp because they didn't have the money to buy the bigger cages. So, a little bit more in-depth review of that would likely be done by the site visitors as well.
I think there's just some references.
Okay.
And for AAALAC.
So here's just a few more. Maybe this is the last slide. Let me look. Okay, so just a few more slides here on different information that may be useful. I'll turn it back over to Tanya here. This is her area.
Okay, so this is the self-reporting incentive that USDA has now for probably about 2 years or 1 year at this point. Is everyone familiar with this at this point who has USDA-covered species housed? Great. So I'm just reminding you that it's not a mandatory program. It is voluntary. There are only a few things that need to be mandatorily reported to USDA, and that's when an IACUC suspends a study or when a significant deficiency goes uncorrected beyond a correction date. And this incentive program is based on if you have a good compliance history, and if you have an event that is a critical non-compliance, so it's a serious adverse event to an animal or an animal dies, and it is based on a non-compliant item. So if you're not sure, you can reach out to your local veterinary medical officer and ask that person, and that could be considered to be reporting as well, as long as you do so within 5 days of the date the incident has occurred. So if you have questions about that, you could certainly ask me. It's 5 business days, right? Yeah, so if something happens over the weekend and you need to convene early in the week, you have a little bit of buffer area there. But you don't have to report in writing at that time of the 5-day self-report. You can call somebody, the office, your local office, Fort Collins or Raleigh, or your local veterinary medical officer. And then these are some references. So this is where on our website you can find the Animal Welfare Act. You can also find tech notes and guidances, such as the tech note on identifying self-reporting incidents. Okay.
And this is just some key references and resources from OLAW. We have one on enrichment and social housing resources. Everyone, I think, is familiar with the prompt reporting guidance from OLAW, guide notice, and we also have a topic index within our website on environmental enrichment for those who may be interested.
And on our website, we have a variety of FAQs you can see listed there on application of performance standards, environmental enrichment, social housing and social experience. And then we also have a position statement on social housing and one on cage or pen space. And as Tanya and Neera said, we're always happy to have conversations. If you have any questions, you can call our office. You can email us. We have a general email box, accredit@aalac.org, and when you send a query to that email, then it gets directed to somebody in the office that can respond back to you. And just to put this up here, this goes back to what John said about things that we expect to be reported. This is not listed this way on our website, but this is what you would get if you report to us and we send you an acknowledgement letter, and this is the wording we have at the bottom of the letter. And I've always found this helpful. You know, you can't really over-report, so we establish a trust relationship with units, and sometimes there's gray areas about whether you need to report or not. So, you know, if you're on the fence, you can certainly report it to us. It's all confidential. Using the accredit@aalac.org email address is a convenient way. If you choose to send it in via post or mail, you can do that, or you can call us as well. And just as was mentioned with some of the other cases, you know, if there's a incident, then we're always looking at, well, are you trying to figure out why that happened and then hopefully prevent it in the future? That's really as important as anything, if that's possible.
So I think
That's it.
Yep. So we've completed our objectives. Good job, you guys. I think everyone is on target, and as you can tell from the scenarios, a lot of it is not just black and white. There's a lot of shades of grays in between. And when in doubt, give any one of us, you know, our organizations a call. We're always there to provide advice and help. It's not going to be marked in stone if you call us. We get lots of hypothetical questions all the time, and we're willing to answer those hypothetical questions without any commitment whatsoever. So, any questions or comments before we go on to the next session? Yes.
Go ahead and Eric, give her the mic so you can capture it.
I was curious, how does AALAC assist facilities if they report to AALAC that they're experiencing significant animal rights activity?
So we have a variety of ways that could be assisting depending on the area of the country it's in. We might help you partner with your local organization, like, for example, Pennsylvania has the Pennsylvania Society. Sometimes we would have you connected up with NABR, and we also have a media and communication specialist within our office. Her name is Lori Weeder, so we put your unit contact in touch with her to try to help, if nothing else, thought partner to say, well, you know, what are some ways that might have been working in the past to help with this scenario you're dealing with, hypothetically, of course.
All right, can we get a round of applause for our panelists?
You guys should get the applause.